Good morning to you, Beerud, and good morning to everybody out here. Good afternoon in Denmark, I should say. Welcome to this second of our FinTech Academy series of webinars, which we launched last month in Las Vegas. And today, our focus is like a dual focus. It's on bots, but it's also on the fact that we have our distinguished guest here, Beerud Sheth, on entrepreneurship, to successful serial entrepreneur. Just before moving into the subject, I have a few practical details about our webinar here. So thanks for listening in, everybody. And you can, besides listening, you can participate in our webinar. Everybody can participate today. And the way you can do that is by either writing a question in the panel in GoToWebinar, or if you wish, you can push the button with raise your hand, and then we'll open up your mic so we can hear your voice, and you can ask your question directly to us here in Silicon Valley. And also a practicality for you guys who are listening in on the mobile. If you swipe left, you can see the presentation. If you swipe right, you can see the picture and the cam here with Beerud and myself. So that's it in terms of the practical introduction. Now it's a great pleasure, Beerud, to introduce you. And thanks for coming to Palo Alto at 7 a.m. in the morning.
Thank you for having me, and I hope I'm awake to answer all your questions. Just still waking up, so forgive me.
Yeah, and I hope the tea is good. And Beerud, you have an impressive background. We're really happy to have you here. You are one of the true Silicon Valley serial entrepreneurs. And not only the CEO of this very interesting company, Gupshup IO, but you're also the founder of the Elance,
right?
A company where I was a customer, a very happy customer myself. So we can not only talk about chatbots, we can also talk maybe a little bit about entrepreneurship in Silicon Valley if we get to that.
Sure.
So again, welcome. And I think to kick this off, I'd like to start with a question to you about bots. There's a lot of talk about bots here in Silicon Valley, and what is it that has made bots such a hot issue right now here in Silicon Valley?
Yeah, so once again, thanks for having me here, and good afternoon to everyone in Denmark. I think you're right, and there's a lot of buzz around bots and AI, and we've barely begun. I think this is just evolving. If you're following the F8 conference last week, again, a lot of interest around messenger bots, and then there's Microsoft and Google conferences coming up in a couple of weeks. So you're going to see that kind of excitement building up, right? So to put it in context, right, why the excitement? Why is Silicon Valley saying, bots and AI are sort of the next big thing? I'm just going to use a slide, actually. Sure. A picture will help, to put it in context. And I think, this is a picture that sort of explains why people are excited about bots. The way I think about it is really it's sort of this once-in-a-decade kind of technology shift or a platform shift, right? And to put it in context, what that means is if you look at the last 30, 40 years of tech history, every decade or so, the very way in which we use computers or the way we use software has changed, right? So right up to the birth of the PC, the very first mechanism was the desktop sort of paradigm, right? You had a computer with a desktop OS, and then you downloaded a desktop application, and so there'd be a gaming application, a banking application, and whatever else you wanted to do. A decade later, in the mid-90s, it changed to the web model, right? So the browser was the new platform, and websites were the new applications. You had the gaming website, banking website, and so on. In the mid-2000s, it changed again, this time to a smartphone and mobile app kind of model. You downloaded these mobile apps to your device. And now we are on the verge of yet another major shift, this time to, the messaging app becoming the new platform, and these things that we call chatbots are the new applications, right? So think of bots as the latest reincarnation of a desktop application or a website or a mobile app. And the difference is that a chatbot is a software program that can have a conversation with you, right? So instead of a structured interface, it has a conversational interface. And when I say messaging, I mean not just text, but also voice, right? So in a way, we are moving into this new world of more natural, intuitive, conversational interfaces. So less training, greater usability. Everybody has messaging apps on their device. That's the one app that everybody uses. So it's really a very broad-based, very horizontal shift. That the front end for computers or for software is changing, and it's going to affect literally every industry, every vertical, just any software that you use. You know, it used to be websites, then mobile apps, and now it's going to be chatbots. So it's very significant. It's a big deal. And the final thing is, you know, this whole trend is also converging with the recent developments in AI, because once you make it conversational, it needs to be intelligent, it needs to be human-like. So natural language processing and AI is both, you know, AI on the back end, bots on the front end are sort of transforming everything. So the way we use everything, the way we are going to use computers is just by talking to them, almost kind of Star Trek-like. Right?
Yeah, excellent. And thanks, Beerud. And again, I'll remind you guys listening in here, feel free to ask questions to Beerud or myself. I'd like to just follow up on a point you made here about F8. And for those guys who haven't heard about that, that's the Facebook Developer Conference, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, and then maybe you can put Facebook into this context of messaging. Because they have a pretty clear view on messaging, right? With their Facebook Messenger app, and so what does that mean in terms of messaging and Facebook Messenger? Does that mean that you can actually interface applications via Facebook Messenger?
So you know, with the rise of smartphones, by far the most popular application is messaging apps, right?
Yeah.
Certainly Facebook Messenger, but even in other parts of the world, you have WhatsApp, also owned by Facebook, and then WeChat, Line, Kakao, and many other, right? Slack, Telegram, Skype, and so on. There's like dozens of messaging apps that have become very, very popular, right? So what's really happening is these messaging apps previously were just for person-to-person communication, right? And they are evolving from that to now becoming a platform for all kinds of services, right? So messaging as a platform is the big trend, and Facebook is one of the pioneers, one of the leaders in that. I mean, they, you know, between Messenger and WhatsApp, they have already 1 billion plus users on each of them, and in a way for them, right, the more you use Messenger, the more things you do with Messenger, the greater the engagement, and over time it'll also lead to more monetization. So they've always been very, very heavily focused on driving more engagement. And the interesting thing is it sort of makes the OS, the mobile OS, sort of less important. It doesn't matter whether you have an iOS or an Android or any other kind of mobile device, so long as you have Messenger, all these services that you want to use. So their vision is, you know, you use it not just to communicate with your friends, but to communicate with businesses. And businesses, of course, they have to automate it because, you know, they talk to many users. So these are the chatbots that they'll talk to.
Yeah. All right. So I listened in to the conference that you referred to, the F8 conference. There was a lady called Regina Dugan leading up the Building 8 initiatives. And she was talking about actually voice being the new OS.
Yes.
And what is it that she's thinking about when she talks about voice being the new OS?
You know, I think, see, one of the biggest challenges is, you know, computers are getting really, really fast and smart and so on, right? But this human-to-computer interface is very slow. I mean, think about it, right? For humans to communicate with computers, you need a keyboard where you can type maybe 40 or 50 words a minute, right? That's so slow compared to all the things that it can do. Now, of course, your voice interface is emerging, which means you can speak to it. Again, maybe a little faster, but not that much. And then to make it even simpler, right, what they're thinking about, or there's research going on, is maybe we have a chip in our brain that can instantly communicate to the computer
Yes.
at the speed of thought,
Yeah.
which means you don't have to type, you don't have to speak,
Yeah.
you just think, and
Okay.
and I think they showed a demo of somebody who was sort of very
An
physically
ALS
challenged.
patient, I think, right?
Yeah, I
Yes.
think ALS patient who
Yeah.
was able to move the cursor, and it's
Yeah.
just the starting point, but it's amazingly powerful.
It is. So thanks again. Then just the difference between so when we talk messaging, so there is the voice interface, and then there's the text, the written interface. Can you shed some light? Is one going to take over for the other, or are we still going to see both writing and speaking with our computers and phones?
Yeah, I think as it stands right now, it's probably going to be both, because it depends on context as to which is the better medium.
Okay.
Right? If you're in a private place, in your car, in your house, you're okay speaking to a device. But if you're in a public place or in a meeting, you obviously cannot speak. You're better off texting.
Yeah.
If it is structured information, you're better off reading it rather than listening to it, because just the way the brain works. If I'm looking at a menu, for example, right, I can only remember 4 or 5 things, but I can look at a lot more things. If I'm reviewing an RFP document, for example, I'd read it rather than listen to it, and so on, right? But if it's a story, I want it to be read, or, to be voice is better than text, and so on. So it kind of just it depends on the context. Also, sometimes selecting, right? If I have multiple choices, I can just very quickly scan and pick one, and so on. So I think you're going to have both proliferate. In fact, you're going to have multimodal interactions where you may speak to something and it shows you something on a screen, right? Or you may click something and you listen to something. So I think you're just going to have voice and text being used in very sort of intermingled way.
Okay, interesting. So again, I remind you guys listening in here, please do ask questions to us.
Right.
So one kind of futuristic thing was this F8 or Building 8 idea of typing directly with your brain. But I have actually heard you talk about something I also think is kind of futuristic to me, because you are making a reference to one of my favorite TV shows, Star Trek.
Right.
And you were talking about an Interbot system which reminded you of Borg in Star Trek.
Right.
So to me that sounds like future. What are you talking about?
So if you look at bots, right, today, sort of the first wave of bot development is all focused on creating individual bots that interact with humans, right? So let's say a pizza ordering bot that you can order pizza from, or a news bot that would send you personalized news, and so on, right? Or a taxi bot or a coffee bot that would, that you can interact with. But then if you think about it, the next stage of bot development is going to be these bots talking to each other to do many more interesting things, right? So for example, you could have your shopping bot talk to all the merchant bots to figure out the best deal on whatever you're looking to buy, right? Or you could tell your Uber bot to tell the Starbucks bot to have your coffee ready by the time your car arrives.
I love that.
Right? And so on. Or even sort of creating bots will be transformed. You can take a NLP bot, right? Or actually a translate bot plus an NLP bot plus, let's say, a simple pizza bot, and simply by stringing them together, you get a multilingual, intelligent pizza bot. Right? So now you're doing plug and play, where these bots are connecting with each other to create an intelligence that's bigger than each one alone has. Right? So the idea that I was referring to is that once bots can communicate with each other, they can tap into each other's intelligence. In fact, we're just announcing, I think today, that Microsoft is putting their AI and Bing services as bots on this Interbot platform that we launched recently. So now, if you're building a bot, your bot can talk to Microsoft's intelligent bots, and they become as intelligent as the other, right? So suddenly you go from what's individual intelligence to collective intelligence, like Borg, where nothing can escape because it knows everything, because it can, refer to, it's like, it's the collective mind.
It's a collective mind, yeah.
Exactly. So
that's
it's incredibly powerful, scary perhaps, but I think good overall.
And without dwelling in too much technicality here, but what's the difference between, we've been talking about APIs between different applications. What is it that makes Interbots so much more collaborative, integrated? Because we have APIs to various applications.
Right.
Well, so what is this step change?
Sure. So when you compare bots versus APIs, there's many differences, right? APIs are generally sort of request response. They're kind of unidirectional, right? Bots can be bidirectional, meaning they can talk to each other at any time. APIs generally tend to be synchronous. Bots can be asynchronous, right? So a bot may ask a question, and the other bot may reply maybe half an hour later or a few hours later when some other event happens, right? Let's say when the price of the flight goes under $200, notify me, right? Now that's something that's very hard to build with API-driven systems. Also, APIs are designed for developers to, at least one party has to be a developer to be able to integrate these things. But the example I was giving was literally like Lego blocks. You can just plug and play them together. Anybody can do it. A third party who's not technical can combine bots to build sort of, compose new services, really.
Right. Okay. Interesting with the asynchronous. That's quite clear, and that's also when you talk about customer service bots, for example. That's one of the things that differentiates voice, pure with a human voice, with messaging.
Yeah, I mean other things too, right? APIs tend to be very flaky. If you miss a parameter, it just breaks. Bots are inherently designed to be conversational. So if it misses a parameter, it'll ask you, hey, what city do you want to fly to? You can tell me that. So I think it's it's a very different metaphor. Ultimately, everything is software and sort of equivalent. I mean, you could implement this in APIs, but it'd be much harder. I think, think of bot as a very powerful metaphor to build these intelligent services and connect them together.
Right. So we actually thank you for all the questions that are coming in here. I think our discussion is spurring a lot of interest here.
Great.
So, and I'm just going to read out here. It's Niklas asking, does voice interfaces have a role in the financial sector? And I think, thanks, Niklas. It is FinTech Academy, so very relevant question. And I know you do have some really interesting experience in this specific sector.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think firstly, financial sector is ripe for disruption because of bots and AI. It is information intensive, communication intensive. There's a lot of financial events happening for every one of us. Right? Every time I swipe a credit card, I do a transaction, interest rates change, market events happen. There's a lot of information to communicate, and bots can be very, very powerful in that respect, right? So I think bots can transform a lot of different things in FinTech, right? It could make decisions for us autonomously, right? For example, I may forget a payment deadline, but my bot will never forget, right? Or I may need to optimize my payment, move money from this account to that account because I get a higher interest rate. I might forget to do it, but my bot can be doing it 24/7, always optimizing, right? So I can delegate a lot of authority even within limits to the bot to take care of my things. And then when you talk about a voice interface, I mean clearly, when you're at an ATM, I mean you should just be able to. Imagine today when you call into a bank, you kind of firstly stay on hold for a while, then you authenticate yourself, and finally you get to, the query. When with a bot, you should be able to say either what's my balance or, where did my money go? And it knows what you're referring to. It's personalized. The context is already there. You're authenticated, and so on. So I think, I mean both voice and text I think will play a significant role in financial interactions. If you're like I said earlier, if you're in a public place, you're not going to discuss verbally with the bot. But if you're at the ATM or in your house or in the car, you can sort of very quickly get a handle on your finances. In fact, you may not need to because your bot's taking care of it.
Right. And then there's, as you're saying in the first example of reminding you, there's also this asynchronous element that you can ask it to overlook or follow. and then let you know when the occurrence of a missing payment is coming up.
Right.
So it's kind of back to a little bit the collective mind.
Right.
It's kind of peace of mind. You can let the bot remind you in this very simple manner.
Exactly.
Text or voice or however.
Exactly right. Right. I think today, in a way, the reason why technology feels so difficult, or all of us feel overwhelmed, is all the decision making resides in our brain.
Yes.
And our technology, I have to click a button to do something here, another button to do there, but all the decision is mine.
Yeah.
I think with bots and AI, for the first time, you're going to be able to delegate decision making actually to these pieces of perhaps autonomous software.
Yeah.
And of course, you need to put some limits around that, but it's very, very powerful. So in a way, there's this old joke about putting a monkey on my back or taking a monkey off my back. Are you taking over responsibility so I don't have to think about it? Right? A bot can do that, and that's very powerful.
So, and then I think the follow-up question from Niklas, thank you, Niklas, that was about do you have some specific examples? I think I read something about, was it Yes Bank?
Yes, right.
Yeah.
So, we've worked with a lot of financial organizations. I'll come to Yes Bank in a second, but Sage is a big UK-based accounting software company, and they wanted to make accounting simple for freelancers and small businesses, because while everybody has to do it, it feels like a chore. Sometimes at the end of the month, you're reconciling lots of transactions. So what they did was, and what we did for them was create this bot where you could say, I spent $50 at Starbucks for a client meeting, or I spent $100 at Walmart for an office party. You're just chatting with the bot, but on the back end, it's filing that as an expense or as an income, keeping track of my balance, notifying me, notifying when the payments are received, etc. Right? So now, in the flow of my regular life, I can just file these expenses and income without worrying about filing it up for end of the month. So that was one thing. Then with
I would love that.
Exactly.
I mean, when you're traveling and you have your expense accounting,
exactly,
just do it on the spot, and then it's taken care of.
And you just take a photo of the receipt, and that's the end of it. Right? So you can make it that simple. So that's very powerful. Then we're working with a lot of banks in Asia. Yes Bank, and then HDFC and ICICI banks as well. And what they've done is actually two things. One is a customer-facing experience where they can look up certain products. Financial products tend to be very complex.
Right.
Insurance policy, which is the right one, the right account, the interest rate, mortgages, and so on. So product discovery driven by consumers through bots. And then the second thing is even their own employees oftentimes find it very hard to keep track of new products and new information that's coming out. So even employee education, and they have access to maybe some internal systems as well through the bot. So they're offering these services through there. So I think we are very, very early. I think for banks, security is a big deal, and what information goes through there. So a lot of issues have to be resolved. And where are the bots hosted? Are they in the cloud? Are they on premise? And so on. So so for now, they've just started with some very simple and small things, but I think this will really transform. I mean, you don't need bank branches anymore, right? I mean, you can just talk to the bot, get everything done. Really, that's your ATM. I mean, everything you can do on an ATM, you can do on the chatbot. So it's really that simple,
Okay. Well, thank you. I think that we have several questions here.
Sure.
And one of them is now coming. It's coming from actually one of our FinTech Academy members, Spanor. And it's Kip asking, and this is kind of a strategic thing. What, let's say in the future, when bots are really becoming the interface that we have to our the intelligence in our phones and on our computers. Because today many companies put a lot of effort into UI.
Right.
And how are bots going to change the competition among companies? I mean, who are you dealing with actually? Because now I'm just talking, and which company is actually dealing with my requests? Do you have any? I know this is kind of far out,
right?
But have you made any thought yourself about what does that change? How does that change the competitive landscape?
Oh, I think this will be very, very disruptive to banks and financial organizations in particular, right? I think what will happen is you'll have a new layer of intelligence, and you'll care more about this personalized AI that knows you and understands you and knows your preferences, and it almost doesn't matter what lies underneath, right? Let me use an example, right? Let's say the car industry, right? It's been around for 100 years, and everybody sort of loves this brand versus that brand and so on. But think about it, as self-driving cars come about, now the software layer becomes much more intelligent, much more capable, and let's say it knows my preferences and what I do and where I go. At some point, I'll care more about the software than I care about the hardware, right? It's kind of the same thing if you think about banks as hardware, which is places where they keep your money and keep track of it. But there could be a layer of intelligent software on top of it. It may be provided by an organization that's not a bank at all. But it knows what you like, what you don't like, how you like to manage your money, is it conservative, aggressive, and so on. And you have this personal relationship. It's like your personal banking assistant. And you will have a stronger relationship with them than with the underlying bank. And by the way, they won't care where the actual money is kept. It may be spread out, or they may change from this account to that because they offer better terms. So suddenly, right, consumer relationships will be with a different brand that's not even a bank, but it doesn't matter because it's better than a bank or today's bank, if you will.
Okay. So I think we have several more questions, but I'd like just to put into perspective your own business now, because it's quite substantial, the amount of volume you're handling in terms of messaging and clients using your system already. So because due to the language, I think bots are not necessarily as evolved in Denmark as they are here, but it'll come. But just could you shed some light on where you are in terms of how much volume are you actually already now handling?
Sure. Firstly, I think Europe is doing a lot in bots. For some reason, I've seen a few Austrian startups, believe it or not. Even London has a very active bot scene and so on. So I can't imagine Denmark lagging far behind. I'm sure it'll move very quickly. As far as my company Gupshup is concerned, Gupshup, by the way, means chit chat in Hindi, and very appropriate for a messaging-based company, right? So we are sort of, we've seen the power of messaging as a platform for many years. Messaging in the feature phone era meant SMS, so we are one of the largest cloud platforms for SMS, and now all these other IP-based messaging channels have opened up. So we have 30,000 plus developers, about 25,000 plus bots that have been built on our platform. I think we handle about 4 billion plus in messaging. What we offer is sort of all the tools that are required for building bots, right? So it has sort of cross-platform APIs that connect to Facebook and Telegram and Skype, and even Google Home, and soon Amazon Alexa and others as well. So the idea is you build a bot once and it connects to all these other channels. Then there are tools for building the bot itself, hosting, monitoring, analytics, and so on. And then Interbot tools for interbot communication. Once you build a bot, you can actually build modular bots and then have them connect with each other or do interesting things and so on. So in a way, it's sort of the quickest and fastest way to build, quickest and easiest way to build advanced bots, and that's our vision, right? So we are supporting this whole bot ecosystem and driving it.
Well, thank you. So very interesting. Also now the talk about Denmark language. You mentioned Austria, UK. You mentioned where your name is coming from with chit chat. Now messaging as a phenomenon. And Asia, India.
Right.
So is there a particular reason why Asia plays such a big role in messaging? And what does that mean for bots? And should we be extra concerned, us here in Silicon Valley and in Europe? Because I've heard many people talk about in Asia, messaging is just much more common.
Right. Yeah, I think, in a way, sort of Asia missed the first, say the desktop wave and the web wave, right? When it actually happened, Asia didn't even have sort of the computing landscape, the number of computers and so on, while US and Europe was very dominant with those technologies. So in a way, Asia leapfrogged to mobile.
Yeah.
Right? Mobile became the primary computer through which most of these Asian consumers use use the internet really. And on the small screen in particular, messaging has been very, very dominant, right? While messaging has been around for a long time, when you have a big screen, think about it, right? We do all our real work in a spreadsheet or in a document or on the web, and then you have a little messaging window on the side to chat with it. But once you have a small screen, right, really the only thing that works well is the messaging interface, right? And that's why messaging has become dominant so much as it becomes the primary way in which people like to use these small screens, right? So with the rise of the small screen, with the rise of mobile, messaging has become primary, and therefore bots will also become, a lot of that innovation is being driven there. If you think about WeChat in China, in particular, they've been sort of the early pioneers of doing much more of messaging as a platform, right? Now, they didn't exactly have bots, and that's a longer conversation, but doing more with the messaging app has been an Asian thing all along, because that's the only computer, really. Yeah. There's no other alternative.
And do you also see that, so in terms of your was it 30,000 developers?
Right.
It's a huge
Yeah,
number.
But it's just the beginning.
Yeah, and it's just the beginning.
Right.
And do you see this this pull, this interest coming mainly from Asia or mainly here, or is it? I assume it's all over, but
Yeah.
do you see any geographies moving faster than others?
So I think, well, I mean, as you'd expect, I think it's really US, Europe, and India.
Yeah.
India, because there's not only for the Indian market, but India is also the back office for a lot of European and American companies.
Right.
So in terms of just the sheer number of developers, India plays a big role. US, of course, is sort of numbers-wise, India and US are sort of the top two countries.
Okay.
And then Europe kind of gets broken out across many countries, but collectively it's probably the same. So those are the three areas in which it's growing the most. Yeah.
Very interesting. Okay, so let's, again, I encourage you, we get many questions. Thank you very much. I'd love for someone to raise their hand, push the raise hand button, so we can have you actually ask a question directly to Beerud and myself here. So please, if you do have a question more, please do raise your hand and we'll open up your mic so we can hear your question. But until that happens, I'll go on with the questions we've gotten on the chat. No, actually, I'm gonna ask a question that I've been wondering about. And that's about me as a user. How do I know what's available for me in terms of bots? So, I mean, all I see is my chat interface. I might only see a Google Home device. How do you do discovery, etc.? How do you find out who I can talk to, which pizza company I can order with? How to order my flowers, or how to do a search on travel. Isn't there a kind of an evolution there about to happen?
Yeah, I think so discovery is indeed a big problem, search and discovery, in the early stages of this bot phenomena, right? So in fact, at F8, Facebook announced something that applies to Facebook Messenger. They're going to have bots organized by category, so you can and certain bots are featured based on how good they are and what the user reaction is and so on. So these things are, I mean, again, if you go back to the early days of web phenomena, right? We had many iterations before search came about. I mean, there was the directory, and there was the human curated directory and the artificially done one, and then search engines became so dominant and powerful because they solved this problem where, once we went from thousands of websites to billions of websites, search became a big deal. Same thing with bots, right? Today you have kind of thousands of bots, but soon as you get to millions and billions of bots, which I do expect will happen, finding them is going to become a challenge. But at the same time, I guess bots are going to help you, right? Your personal assistant bot that knows you, knows your preferences, will also know to look up other bots based on those criteria. So I think you may not. So yeah, I mean, today we are talking about discovery purely from a human standpoint, but you can again delegate that to a bot that will go talk to all the other bots and figure out the best ones.
Of course, you can ask the bot
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the one thing I'll add is at some level you may not need to know whether the entity that you're talking to is a human or a bot, right?
Mm-hmm.
Imagine you send a message to a pizza store,
Yeah.
and the pizza arrives.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know or care whether on the other side there's a human or a bot responding, right? And so I think in some ways bots are going to be an invisible technology.
Yeah.
They're just going to come in everywhere without people even realizing sometimes, right? Because your customer query may get responded instantly, and you may not know or care how it happened. So I think it's going to be all around us. It's going to be all pervasive.
Yeah.
Somewhat invisible, right? You don't even need to know. You're still dealing with the same business and the same brands, but it's all automated.
I mean, anytime I prefer pizza my heart.
Right.
And as long as I get pizza my heart,
there you go.
No. So anyways, so we have a question now from Vin.
Venkateshwar.
Thank you. Yeah. And that's about startups. And how, if you're a startup, how do you get started if you're interested in making a bot interface for your application? How does that work? And is it all on the startup, or do you provide some type of services? Now I'm kind of going back into your company.
Sure. Yeah. I think see, as the bot space is growing, as lots of companies are building bots, the tools space is also growing, right? All the enabling technologies that you need for bots to succeed and thrive. So that's improving dramatically, and it's becoming easier and easier to create these bots, right? So for example, like I mentioned earlier, on the Gupshup platform, we have cross-channel APIs. So you build a bot once, but it can connect to like 25 plus messaging and voice channels. It takes care of development, testing, publishing, hosting, monitoring, and so on. It has inter-bot communication capabilities, and there are a lot of templates.
We have a slide showing. Maybe you can show that.
Take you through a little more detail. I'll skip a couple of slides here.
Yeah.
And I think this is the way to think about it, right? That there's a huge space that's emerging for technologies. So if you think of bots all the way at the top and the users in the messaging channels all the way at the bottom, then between the two, you need a lot of these things to happen. Yeah. And just like in the by analogy in the web ecosystem, you needed HTTP and HTML as a standard. You needed hosting, let's say with AWS or Google, then search engines, and then advertising, payments, and so on. So the same thing with bots. And then what Gupshup does is we are sort of one of the leading providers of the infrastructure layer, the tools for developing bots, and then we just launched the Interbot communication as well. And I have some of these slides are on our website and so on, so you can look, or I can even share it with your audience. So I'll sort of go through it very quickly, but there are tools for every aspect of bot development, so it makes it very easy. It has different kinds of tools. So while developers may need coding tools, a designer could use graphical tools where you just drag and drop to create your bot, or business users have predefined templates that they can just customize and get going. So we have all of that. It connects to a lot of channels. There are AI and NLP kind of modules as well. There's a very powerful scripting tool that we've created. Yeah. So anyway, lots of things out here, and you'd be surprised, right? With our platform, like you can create a Hello World bot and deploy it across a dozen channels in less than a minute, literally, right? And there are videos and documentation on there as well. Now, of course, nobody's actually going to just stop there, right? You want to build your business case and so on, but we've demystified the whole thing. We made it much easy to get started. And the best thing I can recommend for anybody is, if you're even thinking about it, the best thing to do is prototype it, to iterate over it, because it's one thing to discuss in theory, but when you actually see your ideas in execution, it'll trigger more thoughts. I mean, that's how the human mind works, right? So.
And just an anecdote on what you're saying there. You and I met a few months ago with the CEO of a quite large company, and for you guys listening in here, I can attest to the fact that this can be done super fast, because you actually build a bot while we're at the meeting,
right?
And made it work super fast,
right?
So you know, me personally going through this, I mean, it looks. I mean, you have tools for non-techies like myself. I'm more on the business side, if you will, marketing side, as I understand it. So there are tools really for both on the technical and on the marketing side.
Right.
Yeah. Very nice.
Yeah.
Okay. So okay. V, again, thanks V, and sorry for my pronunciation of your name here. But V, you asked another question, and I think I'll pass that straight on to you because it's technical. So is this based on AI/ML?
So AI/ML is one way of specifying, you know, the conversational AI that you want to embed in your thing. You know, we don't use it in Gupshup as much, you know, because we wanted to make the whole bot development process more intuitive, more natural, rather than requiring developers to, you know, learn yet another format or yet another language. So ours is actually a much simpler scripting tool where it's literally like you're writing a narrative, but that script becomes the script for the bot, and there's implied NLP, there's automatic sort of NLP matches, right? So it doesn't do just an exact key phrase match, but it sort of looks at other things as well. And you can do a lot of things in it, like intents and entities and exception handling. I mean, it gets very complex very quickly.
Yeah.
But anybody who wants to develop a bot that can handle natural language processing, these are all the issues that you have to work through.
Yeah.
And it made it sort of very easy to handle it.
All right. Thank you. Okay, so maybe just one more question on bots, and then I'd like to move on to the entrepreneurship angle with your fantastic background here. And again, if you do have questions, thanks for the text written ones, but please do raise your hand, and we'd love to hear your voice on this webinar. A question raised directly into Beerud and myself. So just one more question, and this is actually coming again from one of our membership companies, Spar Nord. And it's Kim again asking about the biggest challenges right now for bots. So where are the main challenges if you look at it from an industry point of view?
Well, you know, I think challenge is probably the wrong word, because we are so early in the development that there's a ton of challenges, because there's so much progress to be made, right? So to put it in context, this whole phenomena, let's say, started in real earnest about a year ago, right? When in fact Facebook at its last year's F8 opened up APIs. So since then, developers have been creating bots, experimenting with things, you know, seeing what works, what doesn't, figuring out how to drive engagement and viral growth and all these other things that you need to know what it takes to build a good bot.
Yeah.
Right. And once you know, so in terms of challenges, you still don't have some outlier bots that are so amazing, that are very conversational, that can handle, let's say, all kinds of banking or all kinds of services and so on. Even though there are early signs, there are some bots are starting to work out well, right? Some use cases like focused on teenagers, you know, dating, for example, that tends to be very popular, so they've been taking off. E-commerce, again, very early days and so on, right? So there's a long way to go. The bots have to get better. The experiences have to get better. You know, the adoption, of course, has to increase. You have to figure out engagement metrics, you know, viral metrics, conversational analytics, and so on. So there's many problems yet to be solved. Right. Discovery is an issue. How do users discover it, and so on. The cross-platform aspect of it, right? Okay, you have a bot working on Facebook, but then you also need it to work on other channels, right, and so on. So there's many challenges, but it's all, the whole ecosystem in a way is moving, and literally every major tech company in Silicon Valley has said, okay, you know, this is the next big thing between bots and AI.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of energy and resources being focused on addressing these things. So I'm very optimistic. I think you'll get. You know, it'll be a very different world, even like a year or two from now, where we are doing much less of point and click, clicking buttons, and just having conversations.
Right. Okay. All right, then I think I suggest we change a little bit and talk a little bit about entrepreneurship, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Because you have an impressive background, as I mentioned, with Elance and now Gupshup and various other ventures.
Right.
So in terms of we're talking, our audience here is Danish entrepreneurs in the FinTech sector. And as a part of our FinTech Academy, our members will be coming over and we'll introduce them to some people and to how things are done here in Silicon Valley. Do you have, like, let's say, 3 advices based on your background? What is it that has made you so successful, and what kind of advice can you give if you say 3 things that really makes it different in Silicon Valley than, say, I mean, you know the world, but 3 things that really makes a difference here as opposed to other parts of the world?
Sure. I think there's many more than 3, but if I were to pick a handful, really, firstly, I think it's just the willingness to fail, right? Okay. Or the willingness to take a risk, to try something crazy, to be aggressive, because when any startup idea, I mean, you're starting at something that's generally impossible or thought to be impossible, and there's lots of naysayers, and everybody else sort of says that you're crazy, why are you doing it, etc. Right? And I think you just need that willingness or that readiness to fail, and in the Valley you kind of see a lot more of that, right? The other thing is just the ecosystem, right? The network, the people, the relationships, and it's not very formal. I mean, there are conferences and meetups and so on, but a lot of it is informal. It could be college networks, alumni networks, but not even, right? Even if you don't have connections, I think I found Valley to be one of the most helpful places. I mean, you can just email somebody unknown, and generally, if it's relevant, they'll help you, and so on. So what that ecosystem does is it brings all the experiences, the collective experience, right? Again, things to do's and don'ts, what works, what doesn't, how to prioritize things like that. I think those 2 are unique to the Valley. It's intensely meritocratic. It's sort of good ideas come up, and then lastly, just fast execution, because ideas are a dime a dozen, but actual working product it matters. It's relevant. Marketing it, focusing on engagement, things like that. So I think those are sort of the few key things. And what I find in general, right? I mean, Europe has all the technology. There's no question about that, and people are very talented. Same thing in India as well, right? I mean, very talented people, but the system there is very challenging because you don't have the shared experience, the collective knowledge base of what works, what doesn't, how to avoid failures, and so on. So you'll see the same sort of Indian or European entrepreneurs perform much better in Silicon Valley than they do in India or Europe, kind of thing. Yeah.
And at what stage would you recommend a startup to start? If we are dealing with a startup who wants to make it global, at what stage do you kind of start thinking about Silicon Valley as the place to be located?
So, I think the one thing that's changed I came to the Valley in the 90s, right? So I've been around here a long time. The one thing that's changed since then is it's very easy to be global and even remote, but to have a Silicon Valley mindset. I see a lot of companies that may be based in LA or Austin or even in Europe and so on, but they'll come through Silicon Valley, once a month or once a quarter, and sort of build this network and plug into it.
Right.
Because it's also incredibly expensive compared to what it used to be, say, a decade ago. It's really hard to retain talent. So in many ways, there are advantages to being outside the Valley, where maybe talent is easier to retain and so on. But you need to kind of plug in here. So you're seeing, even us, right? We are a very virtual company where we sort of have 5 to 10 people here, but 150 people in India, and you create the strong link. Some of the Austrian companies we've seen are also hybrid. So what I would suggest is, unless you have a ton of funding, and want to be fully based in the Valley. But if you're just a startup sort of trying to experiment and do different things, it's okay to have a base in Denmark, but maybe 1 or 2 people could be based here.
Right.
Or they come here frequently enough so that they're plugged in, you know what's going on, your current,
right.
A lot of the partnerships have to be, with, let's say, with the likes of Facebook, Google, and so on. So you by being here, you bump into the right people, and there's a lot of serendipity, there's a lot of corridor conversations or conference meetings that you can't replicate anywhere, right? So if you spend enough time here, and something like that can be done instantly. I mean, it doesn't take a certain milestone before you think about the Valley. You could do it right away.
I really like that. I mean, that plays exactly into my thinking that you need to connect somehow with Silicon Valley. You don't need to move your company necessarily, but the state of mind, the network, the connections, and also due to the fact that many of the large tech companies are based here, come here on a regular basis, maybe do some immersion here for a while, and connect.
In fact, I'm surprised. I thought you were going to say that that's what exactly you guys do.
That is what we're doing.
Right? I mean,
you.
You have a center here.
Yeah, that's right.
So anybody literally can get on a flight and come here and spend a couple of weeks. And you don't even need a ton of scheduled meetings. You can be here, go to the right events, meet some people, and one connection leads to a dozen others, which leads to others, and so on. So I think that's becoming much easier. And I think of it as a revolving door, right? And maybe organizations like yours can make it easy, logistically easy for people to be here and immerse. But that's absolutely critical.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I think we're at a point now where I'd like to start rounding off the webinar. So, I mean, it's been absolutely fascinating to talk to you. It's a subject I love it. It's I love the futuristic part of it, and I think even more from a user point of view, I love bots because it's going to make my life so much easier.
Right.
So just rounding off, I'm going to show just a little bit about our next speakers here. So in May, we are going to have our next guest here, and that's Danny Lange, and he is the VP of AI and machine learning with the Unity Technologies. And then following that, in June, we're going to have a professor from Stanford, the Stanford D School. And I think actually following up on one of your points about experimentation and quick prototyping, that's very much along the lines of the design thinking type of approach to product development. And then we'll in August we'll have Emmanuel here, who's leading an AI company actually called Lending Robot. So that's on the lending side. And then, as you all know, in September we'll have the full immersion week for you guys to come over here and well, take part in the ecosystem as we just discussed. So I think this concludes our talk. If you do have questions about the FinTech Academy, you can read more about it on this site here. And Beerud, just want to say thanks a lot. It's been really great.
Sure.
Thanks for coming this early.
No, thanks for having me. I think enjoyed the topic, the discussion, and would love to chat more offline.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much, and thank you to all of you guys listening in. And we'll see you next time with Danny Lange from Unity. Thanks.